Most people believe they are in control of their actions, especially at work. We like to think we choose our responses, shape our careers, and lead with intention. But what if the real force behind many of our decisions isn't even conscious? What if your success, your failures, your rivalries and regrets are shaped not by your skills or resume, but by a hidden personality living just beneath the surface? This is not the mask you wear in meetings. It is not the role you play when networking or leading a team. It is something older, more primal. The you that you've buried beneath spreadsheets, small talk, and corporate ambition. In Jungian psychology, it is called the shadow self, the hidden dimension of who we are. And it doesn't clock out at 5 p.m. You're taught that professionalism means composure, that success is about merit and strategy. But what if the real drama unfolds in silence, in those flickers of envy during a colleague's presentation, in the need to win, to be seen, to be safe, even if it means undermining others or sabotaging yourself? This is not just a story about corporate culture. This is a descent into the unconscious, a depth psychology documentary written in the cubicles and corridors of ambition. In this long-form episode, The Shadow Self in Corporate Culture, we explore why we do what we do at work and who we become when no one is watching. If the pursuit of self-awareness resonates with you, subscribe. These questions won't leave you the same, because what you're about to hear isn't career advice. It's a confrontation with the part of you that knows too much and says too little. It begins with a question. Have you ever felt like you're playing a role at work? Something scripted, rehearsed, necessary? You wear the right clothes, speak the right phrases, and move through performance reviews and team lunches like a well-oiled persona. But behind that curated self, what stirs? For me, the awakening came not with a breakdown, but a glance. A moment so trivial it would have been missed if it weren't for the shame that followed. I was sitting in a meeting, watching a junior colleague present a strategy. She was good, really good. But instead of admiration, I felt tightness, a cold flicker of resentment. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she reminded me of who I used to be, ambitious, unapologetic, alive. That's when I realized my shadow wasn't a monster. It was a memory, a version of me I had locked away to survive corporate life. And now, it was bleeding through. The key concept of the shadow self was first introduced by Carl Jung, who defined it as the unconscious part of our personality that the ego refuses to acknowledge. These are our disowned traits, impulses, desires, and emotions deemed unacceptable by society, culture, or family. We exile them early, but they don't disappear. Instead, they fester in the dark, gaining power. Eventually, they find their way back, often in disguise. And in the corporate world, the disguise is perfect. Our childhood shaped the architecture of the shadow. If you were rewarded for being quiet, your anger became shadow. If you were praised for achievements, your need for rest, softness, or emotional expression was buried. Society reinforced these patterns. Don't be too sensitive. Winners never quit. Be professional. The more we conform, the more we split. The unconscious mind explains simply is this: it remembers what you forget. It holds your unmet needs, your unlived dreams, and the shame you hide behind your title. And when your inner conflicts meet the pressures of deadlines, competition, and corporate power structures, the result isn't always rational. You may sabotage a project without understanding why. You may dislike a colleague for reasons that feel petty but burn with intensity. You may seek leadership but turn cruel the moment you get it. These aren't random flaws. They are symptoms of shadow repression. The shadow self doesn't make us bad. It makes us human. But unacknowledged, it drives us into patterns we don't understand. Overwork, manipulation, projection. It limits our emotional intelligence. It derails our self-awareness and transformation, and it is especially dangerous in environments where appearances matter more than authenticity. That's why corporate culture is the perfect theater for shadow dynamics. Everything is masked. Everything is filtered through politeness, hierarchy, and fear. And beneath that surface simmers a storm of ambition, envy, fear of irrelevance, need for control. What begins as small frustrations metastasizes into office politics and toxic competition. Colleagues become rivals, leaders become tyrants. Collaboration collapses beneath unspoken resentments. And still, we call it professionalism. But what if you could see it? What if you could name the shadow before it names you? We'll go deeper into those questions in the next section as we follow the shadow's footprints through meetings, power plays, and the politics of perception. Because the shadow isn't just lurking in your colleagues' behavior. It's waiting. In your next reaction, your next decision, your next moment of silence when you know you should speak. But first, sit with this. The unconscious isn't an enemy, it's a mirror, and the reflection you've been avoiding might be the key to everything you've been chasing. The corporate office is rarely silent, even when no one is speaking. Between the fluorescent lights and the clicking of keyboards, something deeper hums beneath the surface. Tension. Not just the tension of deadlines or high-stakes decisions, but a more psychological kind. The unspoken kind. The kind that leaks from the shadow self into every hallway interaction, every team meeting, every performance review. We are told that business is rational, that organizations thrive on strategy, structure, and skill. But spend long enough in any workplace and you'll notice something else moving through the system. Something that isn't logical. It appears in the sudden hostility of a previously friendly coworker. In the sabotage cloaked as just being honest. In the icy glances between departments that are supposed to collaborate. It's the shadow self at work. Not just yours, but everyone else's too. Corporate culture, by design, rewards control. It praises stoicism, ambition, output. Vulnerability, confusion, or contradiction are rarely welcomed. So we adapt. We perform. But in doing so, we create a gap between our surface and our substance. And into that gap slips the shadow. It begins in office politics, that murky dance of influence, reputation, and power. On the surface, it looks like strategy. But beneath it, the shadow thrives. That moment when you subtly undermine a co-worker to protect your position. It may feel tactical, but often it's fear dressed as professionalism. The fear of being replaced, the fear of being invisible, the fear of not mattering anymore. And because the shadow self is unconscious, it often hijacks us without permission. You may convince yourself that you're helping, or that you're simply being efficient, when in truth, you're trying to soothe an inner wound that has nothing to do with work. Perhaps a childhood memory of not being chosen, a long-forgotten humiliation that echoes every time your ideas are dismissed in a meeting. The workplace becomes a stage, and the actors don't even know they're in a play. It's not just in competition. The shadow poisons collaboration too. Have you ever been in a team where everything looked perfect on paper, the skills aligned, the roles were clear, and yet something felt wrong? The energy was off. Meetings became tense, progress slowed. People began withdrawing, hoarding information, or quietly blaming one another. What you were witnessing wasn't inefficiency. It was collective shadow, unresolved projections, bruised egos, and hidden resentments bleeding through the cracks of process. Shadow work psychology tells us that what we deny in ourselves, we project onto others. So when a team member frustrates you, it's worth asking, what are they triggering in me? Is it truly their behavior, or is it something they represent, a trait you've buried, a need you've learned to suppress? One common example, someone speaks assertively in a meeting and you find yourself shrinking back, feeling angry, but unsure why. On the surface, they're just sharing their view, but your reaction may stem from your own repressed voice. The part of you that was once punished for being too much, and now that part resents anyone who isn't afraid to speak freely. In organizations, shadow clashes happen constantly, not because people are bad, but because they are unconscious. And nowhere is this more dangerous than in leadership. When the shadow self infiltrates leadership, the results can be catastrophic. Leaders hold power over salaries, security, opportunities, identities. If that power is filtered through unexamined trauma or ego, it becomes a weapon. The insecure leader micromanages, not out of excellence, but out of fear of irrelevance. The charismatic executive may hide deep imposter syndrome behind bluster and arrogance. The visionary founder might subconsciously destroy subordinates who remind them of a parent they never pleased. These aren't isolated flaws. They are eruptions of the shadow, cloaked in the authority of position. And when leaders are praised for results, the shadow grows unchecked. Ethical breaches are ignored because revenue is up. Abusive behavior is tolerated because that's just how she is. This is how organizational trauma takes root, not from policies, but from the emotional debris that no one has the language to name. Emotional intelligence lessons often emphasize empathy, self-regulation, and awareness. But what they rarely mention is that all of these depend on how well you know your shadow. True self-awareness isn't just about knowing your strengths. It's about recognizing your darkness, your jealousies, your manipulations, your ability to harm others while telling yourself you're doing the right thing. The unconscious mind, explained in corporate terms, is this: every workplace has a secret narrative, a hidden emotional climate, a second layer beneath KPIs and mission statements. It is in the stories people don't tell, the fear behind the smiles, the resentment behind the silence, and it is governed not by strategy, but by shadow. The good news? Once you see it, you can begin to shift it, but seeing it isn't easy. The shadow doesn't want to be known. It will fight to stay hidden through rationalizations, defensiveness, and projection. It will whisper that this is about them, not you, that you're the one who's right, that your anger is noble, that your fears are facts. It takes courage to interrupt that story, to say, maybe I'm the one who's afraid, maybe my resentment is mine to unpack. Maybe I'm contributing to the toxicity I complain about. This is the beginning of transformation, not just for individuals, but for entire cultures. Because the shadow doesn't go away. It waits in the space between email threads and glances across a boardroom, in every performance review where truth is edited, in every congratulatory speech that masks an undercurrent of guilt or rage. But what if we stopped hiding? What if we brought the shadow into the light? That's where we're headed next, into the difficult work of recognition, into the mirror you've avoided for years. You can't change what you won't confront, and you can't confront what you won't name. The shadow self is not obvious. It doesn't arrive with warning signs or a red flag marked danger. Instead, it shows up in patterns, subtle, repeating, strangely familiar. You might think your coworker always misinterprets you, but it's the third company where that's happened. You believe your boss is intimidated by your competence, but you've told that story before, and not just about one boss. Patterns are the fingerprints of the unconscious. At first, they appear external. Difficult colleagues, unfair dynamics, unexplainable setbacks. But eventually, if you're brave enough, you ask the terrifying question, what's the common denominator in all these situations? Me, that's where shadow recognition begins. Not with blame or shame, but with a quiet willingness to admit that not all our wounds come from others. Some were self-inflicted, some were inherited, and some we keep reopening. The signs are always there. That persistent envy when others succeed, the bitterness you feel when your contributions aren't acknowledged, even though you brushed off praise just the day before. The quiet satisfaction when a co-worker fails because it means you weren't the only one struggling. These are not moral failings. They're indicators, echoes of pain we never metabolized, shadows we've never faced. For me, it began with defensiveness. Anytime someone offered feedback, even gentle, thoughtful, useful feedback, I felt attacked. My mind raced to discredit them. I'd nod politely, but inside I was sharpening. Counter-arguments, rehearsing retorts, and when I was alone, I'd spiral into resentment. They don't understand me. They're threatened by me. They're projecting. Maybe sometimes that was true, but it wasn't always. And when I finally sat with the discomfort, I found something uglier beneath it. Fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of being not enough. Fear that if I truly listened to the feedback, I might have to change. And worse, I might have to admit I'd been wrong. That fear was my shadow. Recognizing the shadow self requires an almost forensic level of curiosity about your own reactions. It's about noticing when your emotions are disproportionate to the situation, when you're more angry, more ashamed, more desperate than the moment deserves. These moments are invitations, if you're willing to accept them. But introspection alone isn't always enough. The shadow is cunning. It adapts. It will disguise itself even in your inner reflections, convincing you that your motives are pure while burying the deeper impulse. This is why feedback matters. The unconscious mind, explained in another way, is this. It's the part of you that others can often see more clearly than you can. Not because they know you better, but because they're not protecting your ego. That's why mentors, therapists, and emotionally honest colleagues can be powerful allies in shadow work. They hold a mirror you can't hold for yourself. But here's the catch. You have to be willing to look, to listen without interruption, to feel the sting of truth and not immediately armor up. This is why many people never evolve, because they mistake discomfort for danger and feedback for betrayal. But if you can stay present, if you can breathe through the resistance, feedback becomes gold. Not because it flatters you, but because it reveals the places where the shadow still runs the show. The places where you've let childhood beliefs dictate adult behavior. Where old pain masquerades as professionalism. Where your need to be right has cost you connection, progress, peace. This is the heart of self-awareness and transformation. The moment you stop defending yourself from yourself. And yet, shadow recognition is not about confession. This isn't a moral courtroom. It's not about saying, I am a bad person because I feel envy or pride or spite. It's about saying, these parts of me exist. I don't have to act on them, but I do have to understand them. Without that understanding, you become a prisoner of your own defenses. Your career might still progress, you might still lead, but the cost will be invisible, a kind of inner deadness, a disconnect from your own soul. But when you begin to see your shadow, really see it, something changes. Not overnight, not with fireworks, but slowly in moments. You catch yourself judging a coworker and pause, wondering what unmet need that judgment is trying to protect. You receive difficult feedback, and instead of defending yourself, you take a walk, reflect, and return with openness. You realize that your perfectionism isn't about standards, it's about shame, and that loosening its grip won't make you weak. It will make you human, and somewhere along the way your shadow softens, because it's no longer being denied, no longer forced to manipulate from the sidelines. It begins to trust you, and you begin to integrate it. But that's the next step. Before we go there, pause, reflect, ask yourself, not as an employee or a leader or a brand, but as a person. What part of me have I spent years hiding in order to be accepted here? What does my reaction to others reveal about my relationship with myself? Where have I confused armor for authenticity? If even one of those questions lingers, leave a trace, a whisper in the comments, a signal to the others walking this path. Because sometimes the smallest recognition can become the first crack in the mask. the first light into the shadow. There is a moment, after recognition, after the sting of truth, when silence falls. It's the pause between old habits and new choices, a kind of internal reckoning. The shadow has been named. Now what? You don't kill the shadow. You can't. It isn't a demon or disease. It's a part of you, one that has always been waiting to be invited back into the room. And that's the beginning of managing it, understanding that the goal is not elimination, but integration. The shadow contains the very energy you once needed to survive. Its tactics may have been destructive, but its origin was always protective. The lie you told to avoid rejection, a child's defense. The ambition that overran your relationships, a shield against invisibility. Even the manipulation, subtle, smooth, strategic, was born of a deep desire to matter. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that is the task here, not to become flawless, but to become whole. The first step is ownership, to say, yes, I have a shadow. Yes, I have envied others, resented success that wasn't mine, hidden truths, weaponized silence, chased validation like it was survival. And no, this does not make me unworthy. It makes me human. This is the moment self-compassion becomes essential, because without it, recognition collapses into shame. And shame is just another mask, another way of staying stuck. Managing. The shadow self begins with a kind of sacred acceptance. I have walked with darkness and I am still here. From here, integration begins. Integration is the conscious act of reclaiming what you once disowned. It means learning how to use the shadow's intensity without letting it control you. Take your anger, for example. Repressed, it festers. Ignored, it leaks. But understood, it becomes a signal, a source of power, a line in the sand that says, this matters to me, this is not okay. That same anger can fuel justice, courage, innovation. It can set boundaries where there were none. But only if you're honest about its origin and deliberate about its direction. The same goes for envy. It's easy to demonize, but envy is just a roadmap. It reveals what you long for, what part of you wants to expand. Instead of denying, it asks, what does this envy teach me about my unlived potential? And then act, not to mimic others, but to reclaim what you gave up too early. This is how the shadow becomes a teacher. But integration isn't just internal, it plays out in every interaction, every decision, especially at work. Managing the shadow in the workplace means developing a deep psychological literacy, a fluency in your own motives and emotions. It means noticing when your frustration with a team member is less about their actions and more about your own insecurity. It means catching yourself mid-impulse when you want to interrupt, dominate, or disappear. It means learning to pause. The pause is a sacred space. In that breath between stimulus and response, the shadow is exposed. It whispers its old scripts, prove them wrong, don't let them win, show them who you are. But in the pause you choose, you say not this time, and you redirect. This redirection becomes a kind of art. You turn defensiveness into curiosity, control into collaboration, perfectionism into patience. You take the raw material of the shadow and reshape it into something beautiful, functional, awake. But it doesn't happen alone. To truly manage the shadow self, we need others, safe others. People who can hold our truths without flinching. Mentors who model vulnerability. Colleagues who offer feedback with grace. Friends who remind us we are more than what we fear. These relationships become the crucible of transformation. Not because they fix us, but because they reflect us. And in their reflection, we learn new ways to be. Slowly, the workplace shifts. Maybe not globally, not institutionally, not yet, but locally, inside you. The temptation to gossip fades. The urgency to be liked eases. You start speaking with more precision, more softness. You admit when you don't know. You apologize. Without performance, you praise without resentment. You say no without guilt. And the most surprising part, you begin to like yourself more. Not the performance, not the curated identity, but the real you. The one who can hold contradiction. The one who no longer needs to hide. You start building healthy coping mechanisms. Not the ones that numb, scrolling, overworking, blaming, but the ones that connect. You journal, you walk, you ask questions instead of making assumptions. You breathe before responding. You step away instead of exploding. You return with clarity, not punishment, and in doing so, you model something rare in corporate culture. Authenticity, not the buzzword kind, the kind that disarms tension in a room, that turns meetings into mirrors, that builds trust, not just because you say the right things, but because people feel your presence, your honesty. Your work, you're no longer at war with yourself, you're in relationship with yourself. And from that place, everything changes. We'll explore the outcomes of this journey in the final section. What it means to lead with light, to build genuine relationships, and to define success not by dominance or image, but by integration, by peace. Because when the shadow becomes your ally, success takes on a whole new meaning. There's a strange kind of quiet that follows the storm of self-confrontation. Not the silence of repression or denial, but a deeper stillness. The kind that comes when you stop fighting yourself. When you've looked your shadow in the eye and realized it wasn't a monster, just a memory, a forgotten part, a voice waiting to be heard. This is where true transformation begins, not in the thunderclap of enlightenment, but in the slow, steady unfolding of a new way to be. And it begins with self-compassion. You cannot walk this path without it. Because the more shadow work psychology reveals, the more uncomfortable truths surface. Things you've done, words you wish you could take back, moments where fear, pride, or pain spoke louder than your values. But guilt is not growth. Shame is not strategy, and punishment is not transformation. Self-compassion is. It is the quiet recognition that you did what you knew how to do with the tools you had in the environment that shaped you. And now you know better. Now you choose differently. This isn't about excusing harm. It's about understanding it, owning it, and then deciding to evolve. And from that place, the place of radical self-acceptance, something extraordinary becomes possible. Authentic connection. The shadow self thrives in isolation. It feeds on silence, on roles, on secrets. But when you begin to share your truth, your real truth, something shifts. You find others who are just as tired of pretending, who are also seeking something deeper, who are also ready to trade performance for presence. These relationships don't always look polished. They're not built on constant agreement or perfect behavior. They're built on honesty, on repair, on the courage to be seen, shadow and all. And when you bring that into your work, everything changes. You stop managing people and start relating to them. You stop defending your position and start exploring ideas. You no longer see mistakes as threats, but as data. Feedback becomes a gift. Conflict becomes a doorway. Collaboration becomes real, not because you've eliminated all dysfunction, but because you've created space for truth. This is emotional intelligence at its core. Not a checklist of skills, but a way of being, a depth of presence, a kind of internal spaciousness that allows others to breathe more deeply in your presence, because they know you aren't performing. You're not posturing, you're present, and from that presence, leadership is born. Not the leadership of command and compliance, but the leadership of resonance, of trust, of vision grounded in values. When the shadow self is integrated, Your leadership is no longer reactive. It's responsive, no longer ego-driven, but soul-aware. You can stand in a room of tension and hold it. You can say, "I don't know," without shame. You can own your impact without collapsing in guilt. You can name the invisible forces, power, fear, belonging, without weaponizing them. And this changes the culture around you. Not all at once, not without resistance, but slowly, consistently, your presence becomes a new standard. Others begin to mirror your courage. Psychological safety expands, creativity returns, performance improves. But more than that, people heal. Yes, even in corporate culture, even in boardrooms and break rooms. Because organizations are not machines. They are collections of nervous systems, traumas, dreams. The shadow doesn't disappear when you put on a badge or a title. It walks with you. The question is, are you listening? Success then becomes something new. It's no longer about climbing a ladder that was never designed with your humanity in mind. It's about redefining the ladder itself, about asking, what am I building and who do I become in the process? The new paradigm of success is not domination, it's integration. It's not image, it's impact. It's not perfection, it's presence. And it begins with one radical act, facing yourself, not once, not perfectly, but repeatedly. With grace, with grit, with the kind of courage that can sit across from its own shadow and say, I see you, you're coming with me, but you're not driving anymore. So now, question becomes yours. What kind of leader do you want to be? What kind of culture do you want to create? What kind of self are you willing to reclaim? Because whether you like it or not, your shadow is here. And the more you ignore it, the more power it has. But the more you engage it with honesty, compassion, and care, the more it becomes your ally, your source of insight, your reminder that the parts you once feared might just be the parts you need most. You've reached the end, or perhaps just the first layer. Because what we uncover in the mind can't be neatly closed. If this story shifted something inside you, follow that instinct. Explore the next story in our psychology series linked below, but tread carefully. The truths we find in others are often reflections of what we deny in ourselves.